Hello, everyone. It's Charlene Lee here. And today I'm going to be talking about the disruption gender gap, a topic that's of great passion and interest to me. It's some of the research that I did for my latest book, The Disruption Mindset. And I surveyed 1,000 leaders from all around the world and found this very interesting thing that there's a disruption gap that's out there in terms of how men and women look at disruption. So I want to welcome everybody who's joining us today. Please put into the chat where you're coming from. And also just any thoughts you may have around disruption, about your disruptive leadership, and in particular, how you're thinking about the disruption gender gap out there. If you're a woman who you're experiencing this, or if you're a man and who is seeing this and wants to do something about it too. So you're all welcome to join in the conversation today. So just want to say hello to a few people who are joining already. So hello, Omar. Thank you so much for joining. Sion, thank you for joining too as well. And again, say welcome, hello, and add where you're coming from. All right, I'm just going to give a quick overview of what I'm going to be talking about today. So what I found in my research is that when people have disruption, they're thinking about disruption, well, how do you see yourself as being disruptive in your capability to create exponential change? So one of the things I did was I created a disruption quotient. And the idea here is that you rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10. So 1 being that you are not seeing yourself as disruptive. You like things to be the same every day. So it's a status quo of 1. And then at the other end of this, you're a 10. That means you see yourself as highly disruptive. You create exponential change in your organization, in your community, in your society. You feel very confident that you can create a huge amount of disruption. So when you look at these two ends of the spectrum, you get people of all stripes, of many different types and changes that you could have. So think about yourself. Where do you see yourself on a scale of 1 to 10? And this is a very easy, handy to use quotient because it's a very quick way to just determine how do you see yourself. And it is fairly relative. It's self-subjective. I do have an assessment where you can go and see a lot more of these qualities. But what I wanted to do was to share with you just a little bit more about this disruption quotient. And what happens is that you come into some archetypes. What I found in my research is that there are 2 types of characteristics. The first one, I'll put this a little bit larger, is that you can see an openness to change mindset across the bottom. And then on the left-hand side, you can see on the vertical axis, a leadership behavior that is focused on empowering and inspiring your followers. And what happens is when you have these 2 characteristics, you end up with a 2x2 of different types of archetypes, ranging from a realist optimist in the upper right-hand corner of people who see themselves as very much the change agents inside of organizations, all the way down to the worried skeptics. And I have some other videos that talk about how these different archetypes show up. But I think in particular, though, is that there's something very interesting that came up in my research, and I want to focus on this today. And that is there is a disruption gender gap, in particular between men and women when you see them across every single one of these categories. So just as an example, let's take a look at the realist optimists. What we see here is that men and women could be showing the same exact levels of the openness mindset and the leadership behaviors around empowering, inspiring people. So men and women have virtually the same exact score. But when it comes to how they rate themselves in terms of their ability to drive disruption, men rated themselves as higher and women lower. Again, it's not a huge difference, but it's significant enough. And you can see this across the board for every single archetype. So when I see this kind of difference, it really draws to mind what's going on here. Why is it that men and women have such different ratings of themselves? So I'll go into that in just a second, but I would love to just take a moment to just say hello to all the many people now who have joined. So we have Jacqueline coming in from Lima. We have Mariama coming from Gambia, Admire from UAE, Thomas from the UK, and Robert coming from Ghana, Sabrina from Brazil, Susan from Nashville. Great to have you join us. and Nilam from Sri Lanka. So many people from all over the world. And one thing to share about this data, this is global data. And we're seeing this across every culture and an organization that we're looking at. So this is a distinct issue, not just something here in the United States. So one of the things I want to talk about a little bit is why is this happening? Why is there this disruption gender gap? And some of the reasons could be, again, there's something in the air, something in the water that makes women feel they're not as capable of driving disruption. And some of the research in the past has said, well, this is partly because women only see themselves as ready to raise their hand and go out there and disrupt when they feel 100% confident. Whereas men, for example, might think it's only 60% confident that they need to go out there. And we'll go and dig into this a little bit more in detail. But one of the things I do want to challenge around that is, why is it that women may not feel as confident? Well, if you are the only woman in the room, if you're the only person who can raise your hand and actually say, oh, I am going to be this disruptive person, then it gets really, really difficult. And so when I think about this whole idea of having to raise your hand when you're the only woman, the only person of color, only person of a particular socioeconomic class, ethnicity, whatever it is that makes you feel like you're the only, you're spending all of your energy, all of your presence, everything you can do just to be in the room. And so to raise that hand and to challenge the authority in the room, to challenge the status quo, requires that you feel safe, that you feel included, that you belong to this tribe that you are in. And if that doesn't exist, then you're never going to raise your hand. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about next are just some of the data and issues that we're seeing, especially now during this pandemic. So Nilam, thank you for asking this question. It's a great one, which is, how do we handle the gender gap during this pandemic period? Because there's so many things happening. And is it bigger? Is it different? So I'll show you some data that came recently from LinkedIn and from Lean In and McKinsey that they did. So I want to say hello to a couple other people. Morty, thank you so much for joining from here in the US, and Christopher from Nigeria. Megs, great to see you, like you're joining from Detroit. And then we have Siri also coming from Houston, Luis from Madrid, and Abu coming from, I'm not quite sure, but hello, Abu, thank you so much for joining. So one of the things I want to show today is just a little bit more data. So this is what I was just mentioning before. This is coming from McKinsey and Lean In. It's absolutely fantastic data. And it shows in many ways what the pipeline looks like. And I love this because this is something we see happening over and over again, that the pipeline does not look great. So just showing this in a little bit more detail, let me just expand it all the way open. So what you're seeing here is seeing when people come in at the entry level, versus how they promote into all the way up to the C-suite. And just to give you some numbers here, for every 100 men who are promoted, 85 women are promoted just straight out of that entry level area. So even though women may represent 53% of the entry level, by the time they get to the director level, it's very, very small. It's only 19% of women who are there. So these are huge numbers in terms of what that pipeline is. And in every single point of promotion, women, and in particular women of color, are falling out. Just to give you some more statistics here, if you think about that 100 men who are promoted, only 58 Black women are promoted and 75 Latinas are promoted. And by the time that you get up all the way to the manager levels, only 38% of the positions are being held by women. So this is a huge issue. And while it's getting better, it's still not great. And one of the key questions that I'm always grappling with is, what do we do about this? And especially during times of the pandemic. Just one more statistic I want to share from this research. And that is how stressed people are feeling and the big differences that we're seeing with women. And again, I'll expand this so you can see it all. What we're seeing here on the left-hand side is just the different levels of people feeling stressed, exhausted, burnt out. For men, you can see on the very left-hand side there of all men. And again, I think across the board, everyone's feeling stressed. But when you look at white women, Asian women, Latinas, and Black women, but especially LGBTQ women and women with disabilities, it goes up substantially. And one other areas that I want to point out is, especially when you talk about at the very bottom level here, discomfort and sharing challenges. Only 9% of men are feeling this versus 13% of all women. But you can see it goes across the board. It's just much higher for women. And a big difference is that Black women do not feel comfortable. 22% versus 7% of men and 9% of women can't talk about the impact of current events. So we're seeing a big difference now, just even in the pandemic, just all the things that are happening and the challenges in the workplace that are making it much more difficult for us to address the gender gap. But in particular, the ability for women to step out of a place of being in the norm and raising their hand and saying, I see things differently. I'm going to act in a very different way. So, what do we do about this? Um, One of the things I do want to talk about are what are the actions that we can take, and I would love to see if there are any questions too as well from all of you who are listening here. And a couple things that I think we can do. First of all, I think that we can talk about how do we increase inclusion and belonging, in particular with empathy. This is the number one thing I think leaders need to do all the time, but especially now because of what's happening with COVID and the pandemic. We saw early on that when we all had to change the way we work, and especially with the work from home, a lot of that burden fell onto women. Women taking care of the households, now homeschooling kids, taking care of little ones. And that the estimates here in the United States are 2 million women are at risk of falling out of the workforce. And that's women across all levels of leadership. And when the numbers are so small already in that pipeline that you see, and with every single woman that we lose anywhere in that leadership, it's one less person to serve as a role model, one less person to serve as a mentor or an ally to another woman. So being able to create that inclusion and belonging across the board, this is not an issue just for women, but across all areas, to increase the ability for people to raise their hand, to speak up, and even just deal with all the stresses is absolutely key. Another thing is to double down on mentorship and allyship. And the idea that it's not just women who are mentors, they're by far, by 2, 3 times more likely to be mentors of rising women than men. And so I think we women need to double down, but also men need to step up and pay special attention to this. Because the reality is that I want to go back to that statistic that women 100% will raise their hand. They will raise their hand and volunteer for something or ask for promotion when they feel ready for it, whereas men will do it when they're 60% ready. And the research actually shows something a little bit different. Women tend to see promotion criteria and job criteria as a qualifications that you need to meet those things, that those are rules to be followed. This is the process to follow. Whereas men will see them as guidelines and say, I may not be completely qualified for that, but I'm going to just go and see what happens. And for women in particular, we can't take that risk of not being qualified, asking for promotion before we're ready, or even going through that process and not succeeding at it because of the downstream implications of what any failure in the workplace could look like and impact our reputation and image in that workplace. So these two areas of promoting inclusion and belonging, but also that mentorship is important, because the reality is it's not always clear what the criteria are. And so this is my point here. Be really clear what the requirements are and what's needed to create, to be promoted. So if you're in a leadership position or you're there as a role model, be really clear. What are the real requirements? It may say this in terms of the requirements being written out, but what are they really? And would somebody actually be qualified, even when they may not necessarily meet all of the written criteria? So this is an important thing, especially right now when so many things are in flux with COVID. And then, in particular, talk about the resources that are available for people. When I look at the resources that are available, everything from childcare support, flexible time, mental health resources, people may know it's there, but they don't know how to tap into that. So check in with the women in your group. Again, this is for everybody, but in particular, women and women of color in particular, because you saw that data before that shows just how much more stressed out women are. Make it clear what those resources are available to them, and make sure they know how to get access to it. And the last thing is to be thinking about how we're looking at promotions, especially with everything being changed right now. COVID has completely changed the way we work. And the criteria for performance, the performance reviews, the criteria for promotions have probably changed. But have you taken a look at them, reassess them, understand how the process even of evaluating what those criteria are and whether somebody's meeting them has to change in the face of a pandemic? And then make sure you're communicating this. If there's anything else that's, I think, coming across in the research, it is that we need to communicate much better as leaders, as organizations, as managers of people, but women in particular. What does success look like? So I wanted to see if there were any other questions, because that's what I have for today. That's what I wanted to get across, is that this disruption gender gap is absolutely real. I have the data that shows it. And we also have additional data that this has been a long running issue, in that the number of women who are promoting themselves, being promoted, is just not at the level that it should be. If we can have people coming in at equal levels at the entry level, but not being promoted, people are falling out, then we need to be looking at this, because if talent is the biggest issue we have today around making our growth plans, creating the strategies of being able to meet our customers, then when half of our potential talent pool is not advancing at the same levels as the other half, then we have to look at the reasons for why that is. So just want to say hello to a couple other people. We have Siba coming from Syria. Hello. Ohi Samuel from Nigeria, and William's also from Nigeria, and Nakuthula from South Africa. All right, just want to see if there are any other questions or comments, and I don't see any, so I am going to sign off for today. And again, thank you for joining us. And again, think about all the ways that the disruption gender gap is manifesting itself in your organizations. And if you're a woman thinking about this, I would encourage you to be strong, hang in there. And very importantly, I would say, don't think about yourself that you have to be a superwoman to be able to do all of this. Seek out the help that you need, the support from the mentors who are there. Seek it out from people inside of the communities that are online. Because the one thing I have learned in this career of trying to be a disruptor is that you can't do it all. There is no such thing as trying to create that balance. In the end, it's just a series of less than optimal compromises that you make between your career, your family, yourself, your community. And no one knows that balance. No one knows what those trade-offs are ever better than you do. So be confident in that you're making these choices, these decisions. They will be right for you in that moment. And I encourage you to have the strongest courage possible. I wish upon you that courage to be able to step out and discover what that is. I wish you all the best on your journeys, your disruptive journeys as disruptive leaders. And thank you again for tuning in. And if you'd like to see more content and videos, you can always go to my website at charlenelee.com/videos and see lots of other great content. I'll see you next week. Thanks. Have a good day.